Welcome to SpyCast, the official podcast of the International Spy Museum. I'm your host, Dr. Andrew Hammond, the museum's historian and curator. Every week we explore some aspect of the past, present, or future of intelligence and espionage. If you enjoy the show, please consider leaving us a 5-star review and telling a friend. Coming up next on SpyCast.
Really, because there's so much technology out there and everybody having a phone, again, somebody's collecting information for OSINT. We're going to take that information and turn it into intelligence.
This week we were joined in the studio by Dennis Eger and Shawn Nilius. Combined, Dennis and Shawn have over 6 decades of service to the United States Army under their belt. Dennis is the Senior Open Source Intelligence Advisor, and Shawn is the Director of the Army's OSINT, or Open Source Intelligence Office. In our modern age of technology and information overload, open source intelligence has emerged as one of the fastest growing and most important INTs in the intelligence field. In this episode, we discuss what is open source intelligence, or OSINT, examples of OSINT from the war in Ukraine, how the Army utilises and collects OSINT, and OSINT across the US intelligence community. The original podcast on intelligence since 2006, we are SpyCast. Now sit back, relax, and enjoy the show. Well, I think this is the first podcast we've done on OSINT, and I want to do many more.
Hey, it's great to be here. Thanks for the invite. A topic that is increasingly important, not just to the intelligence community, but to the Army particularly.
Yeah, thanks for having us. We're excited to be here to talk about where the Army is and where we're going with OSINT.
I think for people out there that don't know what it is, could you just tell them what open source intelligence is?
Well, yeah, I'll start. We usually play this back and forth.
Okay.
So really the way we define it, because you have publicly available information, and so that's accessible by anybody, right? And you know, Shawn always talks about it in a way of when we look at an iceberg and what's above the water and what's below the water. And so what's above the water is, very small piece is what you see, and that's about 3% of the internet. And that's probably the Google searches and the publicly available information that you get every day. Underneath the water, that other 97% is stuff that you don't necessarily see every day, still publicly available, but folks with particular tradecraft and training are able to kind of weed through that other 97% to find what they need. So you have that publicly available piece, but OSINT itself is, we define it as based off of, a collection based off of a commander's intelligence requirement. So if a commander or someone on the ground says, I need you to look at this specifically as a collection requirement, holistically set against the rest of the collection requirements we have, that becomes open source intelligence. And that requires training and tradecraft and authorities, a lot of different things. And it's different from just saying, hey, I'm going to go onto the internet and I'm going to research something. So that's kind of, we define it based off of an intelligence requirement for collection purposes.
Yeah, and then I think for the execution, what we're looking at is first you have to be an intelligence professional, okay? So an intelligence professional properly trained and certified to actually go and do collection under approved authorities and mission to actually do the collection. And then as Dennis mentioned, going after a specific intelligence requirement that a commander has stated that they need to have an answer to.
Okay. And I'll steal Shawn's example, I think. He used, was it the, especially when Ukraine kicked off, and it was the
BTG.
BTG, right? The Russian BTGs. And so if you get up in the morning and on CNN, you hear there are Russian BTGs in the Ukraine. That's publicly available. And you go on and you say, well, I don't really know what a BTG is. Let me search the internet. Oh, this is what it is, right? That's publicly available. But when someone in your organization comes and they say, I need to know where those BTGs are in the country, what do they consist of, equipment-wise and everything, but where are they at? That's a targeted collection effort against a requirement. That becomes open source intelligence. So that's kind of how we differentiate it.
And BTG is Battlefield Tactical Group?
Yeah.
Okay.
And so when you look it up, if you Google it, because I did, it'll tell you that it's the smallest combined arms element of the Russian forces. But when you start, as Dennis said, when you start digging into, well, how many of them are there? And then how many of them are actually in Ukraine? And then where are they located? You're getting into collection requirements to answer specific questions for commanders. Now you're doing collection. And to do that, that's open source intelligence.
So I have a couple of follow-up questions. So one of them, when you say professionals, intelligence professionals, I'm guessing you're getting at the idea that I can do some things that Gordon Ramsay does on TV, so I can do, for example, some open source techniques. But because I do what Gordon Ramsay does, doesn't mean that I'm a chef. That takes professional training and so forth. So this is the idea behind what you mean. Is that correct?
Yeah. I think the other part of it is to know that there are certain laws, regulations, and rules that if you're a trained intelligence professional within, for us, the Army, but within DoD and the intelligence community, there are rules you have to follow. So yeah, right up front there for us, as professionals, we have to follow those rules and laws that are set. But you're right. Yeah. I mean, for others, yeah, you're out there. I think I would go back to what Dennis said, though. Without training and expertise and capabilities to support you, you're probably only getting to that 3 or 4% that's out there. Most bad guys or bad actors don't operate in that 3 to 4%.
Okay. And that goes to my other follow-up question. So you mentioned the part of the iceberg you see above the surface and the part you see below the surface. So is OSINT, does it mirror the part that's below the surface? So you mentioned like 95% below the surface. Would 95% of OSINT come from the bottom part of the iceberg, or would it be 50% from the open web and 50% from the deep web, or is there some kind of breakdown that you could give us? Not really.
No, I mean, I think it's a good question, right, from a percentage perspective. But I don't think there's really an answer. I would say that you can get a lot from the 3% that's above, and it still be considered OSINT. Just because it's above doesn't mean that it's not, right? Because if you could be collecting against a specific intelligence requirement and get what you need from that top 3%, but you're doing it in a way where you don't want the enemy to discover that you're looking at those specific things, right? And that's why folks are trained, and they're trained to even know how to look into that 3% for stuff that most people wouldn't in that 3%. What the other 97% gives you is, it gives you areas where there's a lot of illicit activity going on that folks generally wouldn't even think about going. So when you talk to most folks and you talk about the dark web or the deep web, folks are like, well, I heard the term, but okay, great. I don't know what that means. And if you were to show them something from there, they would most folks would say, I don't want to see anything from there again, right? There's a lot of things that happen in there that you can gain a lot of deeper intelligence for. But yeah, there's no percentage either way. Mm-hmm. You can get a lot of information from either. It really just depends on what you're looking for.
And I suppose it depends who's looking, right? The Army may look in different places compared to a business looking for some competitive intelligence or something.
Yeah, and law enforcement, right, might spend more time in the deep web or dark web area looking for those activities that are going on, right? Whereas maybe some of my collectors don't need to know that, right?
And a lot of the prominent examples that we've heard about with the war in Ukraine, they're more on the 3%, right? The Strava heat map of the Russian submarine commander who disappears off the face of the earth. The man with his Speedos in the Crimea giving away the site of Russian artillery and so forth. So there is useful information you can glean from that.
Yeah, and I mean, that's the 3%, right? And there is a lot. So I give the example of So when Ukraine started, right, online there was a there was a video, right, that had surfaced, really in that 3%, right, from social media perspective, and it was a video of an airborne operation taking place in Ukraine, and folks were like, the Russians, at the start of the war, the Russians are jumping into Ukraine, right, and so of course everybody's like, wait, what's going on here? Really? Is that's what's happening? And so that was surface level. But then as they started to really, look at it and peel it back and look at the video and all these things, what an experienced open source collector realized pretty quickly was that's a video from a joint exercise in 2014 that was specifically placed from a misinformation or disinformation perspective to get a reaction or get, maybe it was intended to get Ukraine to move forces toward the airfield. I don't know. But that's kind of one of those examples of those, it's out there and then you kind of got to peel it back and you have an experienced, collector that is able to look at those things. But Ukraine gives us a lot of great examples of things. I mean, if you look at general social media, right, TikTok or otherwise, or Twitter, that everybody that has a phone wants to take a video of something. And when you're taking a video of, and you're narrating and saying, I don't understand this train is going through my town and it has all this strange equipment on it. Like, I don't know what this is, right? That's a video and that's out there and that's in that 3%. And so when you get that, a collector then can really take it and start to dissect it and say things like, well, there's a lot of snow on the flatbed. How much snow? Well, maybe six inches or so. Okay, where did it come from? What region snowed recently? How long do we think the snow was there? How long has that snow been on? Like, to kind of give you an idea of maybe where it came from. Mm-hmm. And then folks will, the whole way along the line, will be videoing this thing. And so you can see where it started and where it ended just from that 3% of someone taking a video, inquisitive about why is this train with this equipment going through my backyard.
And just very briefly, because I don't want to get too sucked into the internet because I want to get back to OSINT, but just so that our listeners understand it a little bit more, can you just give them a brief overview of that iceberg? So we spoke about the part above the surface, the deep web, the dark web. You said there's a lot of things that go on there that people are like, whoa, that's not really for me. Like, just help our listeners understand what that is, who's on there, like, why is that way more than the 3%? Just a very, very brief overview.
Yeah, well, I would start with, again, so the above the water, we like to describe it again, that's the web. That's where most people are going to go on a daily basis for.
This is Safari, Brave, Google,
right, Google,
Firefox.
Right, that you're just looking for general information, or you saw something and you want to follow up on it to do that. But when you get into the deep and dark web, again, I go back to bad things are typically happening there, right? Illicit activity. Places you don't want people to know, so you take it a step further, of hiding where you are or attempting to hide where you are to do that. And so, again, as an intelligence professional, we're typically looking for bad things that are happening. And so that's kind of the place that you've got to go to really find it.
Well, when you look at that, you say there are particular browsers, accounts, VPN type services that are built around getting you into the deep web or the dark web, like
just Tor.
Yeah, like Tor. That's a perfect example. Tor is one that will get you in there, right? And so when we talk about activity that you might see that you can't, there's things in there like trafficking, right? You might run into a site where there's trafficking going on. You might run into a site where there's, pornography, child pornography, like really those things that people don't want to be discovered of what they're doing, and they can go there. And so from an intelligence perspective, there's people and law enforcement, there are people in there that buy and sell weapons or trade or drugs or, right, like there's a lot of stuff that goes on. And it's just knowing how to work your way in there. And that comes from a very experienced collector, because sometimes you might have to spend a very, very, very long time in there to gain any kind of credibility in any site that would allow you in to really see what's going on.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. And the part that people normally use when they're going on to Chrome or Safari, this is the stuff that's indexed so that people can find it, right? Is that correct?
Correct.
Yeah.
Not everything that's below the surface is nefarious. Some of it's just architecture and other things that are not necessarily of interest to the average person on the street.
Yeah, or it could be research. Somebody may be doing research in something that they really don't want out there above in that 3% where someone can find the research. So let me kind of hide it in the noise, so to speak, and so that it's harder to discover my research. And so if we're trying to figure out what research folks are doing on what topics, on what, you name it, chemical weapons, whatever it is, on vehicles, or even trying to find out, what our enemies are looking at with us and the research that we're doing, or are they doing research on, we can find research that they're doing on maybe building equipment that maybe they stole plans from us to do it, right? So yeah, it's not that it's all nefarious. It just could be you just don't want to be seen, and you don't want your stuff to be seen or found for what you're doing.
Okay. So let's dig a little bit more into the US Army and OSINT. So this is something that the Army's done before, but what's different about open source intelligence now, like the OSINT acronym compared to open source intelligence, reading newspapers, periodicals, etc.? Like, why is it different?
Yeah, so I'll start. So for us, when you're reading newspapers or those, again, open media outlets, we call that publicly available information research. Okay, you're just PAI, and then we add the R for research. You're just looking at PAI for research, just for general knowledge that you want to do. But if you're going to, and this is what has changed in the Army, if you're going to collect, again, as we talked about, you have to have an actual intelligence requirement. You've got to be properly trained and certified. You have to have the mission and authorities, and then ultimately commanders, request for intelligence for you to actually do collection, for you to then go out and collect. So we're building actual collectors. Okay, so we're building those collectors again to go and specifically do that, just like we have collectors for other intelligence disciplines. For open source intelligence, that's what we're doing across the Army.
Okay.
Yeah, I'd say what has changed? Technology. That's what makes it different now from what it was before. When you talk about OSINT, before it was periodicals, it was newspapers, it was radio, it was television, like that was what it was. I don't think anyone really imagined back then, the internet, or how big the internet would be, or the amount of information on the internet. So technology has really changed, right? Because that's generally where everyone lives, and whatever device we have is connected, and it's all data, and it's all out there. And so and it is all publicly available. So how do you harness all of that data? How do you take technology to help you harness that? Because there's so much of it. I liken it to when I was, I was working at an organization, and part of my job was kind of reading, reporting, and trying to discern what was going on in Iraq based off of the reporting. And I would have, when I would go in the morning, I would have thousands of reports, paper printed out in stacks around my desk. And the notion was that I was going to read every day 2,000, 3,000, 4,000 pages and try to discern what was going on. When the reality is, you're never going to read. You just can't. You don't have enough time in a day or enough brain power to read that much every single day. So the stack continues to get higher. It's not going down. What technology has allowed folks to do, and everyone puts all that information out there online now. So now you can quickly, with technology, get through that much information. And with AI and machine learning and, everything that's going on now and into the future, you can make a collector's or an analyst's job much, much quicker and much, much easier, as they can get through thousands and thousands and thousands of pieces of information very, very quickly. So it's the internet and technology, I think, that has changed the landscape of open source considerably, because everybody uses a phone or a computer. And I think that's what I try to drive home every time I go to one of these colleges or universities and I talk to folks. What I try to drive home to them is, everything that you do on your phone or your computer it's none of it is hidden. Every bit of it, whether you believe it or not, is publicly available. And somebody can get it and find out a lot of information about you. And that's what's changed. That's what has made it so important. You don't have to. I would say, I tell folks that you might be able to win the next war without firing a shot, because you can use the internet and the amount of information that's out there to sway a population, to sway a narrative, to change the way people think about things. If you want to destroy a country, destroy it from the inside. How do I destroy it from the inside? Well, I can do that just using its own internet against them.
And just for the people that are listening that are struggling maybe to understand like why the US Army does OSINT. So I know it probably seems very straightforward for you guys, but the people that listen to the podcast vary from people like you guys in the business to the average person on the street that just loves a good spy story. So for them, like, help them understand, okay, when they think of the Army, there's platoons, battalions, divisions, corps. Like, why did they need open source intelligence? Why is the military intelligence people not just giving them secret stuff or whatever? I'm drastically simplifying and being a little playful, but just help them understand the US Army. Why does it need open source intelligence?
Yeah, I think the first thing I'd start with is, as we were just talking about, we call it the information environment out there, right, with the internet and technology. I think the last assessment I've seen is about 85% of all information is now publicly available. And the amount of information, the amount of data that's out there continues to grow and grow every day. And that percentage that's publicly available continues to grow as well. So now, to get after that sheer amount of data and that information that's out there, we need, again, trained collectors that can go and actually get that information and actually make something out of it and get it back, to commanders for them to make decisions. So the reason for the Army, I'll use the example with Ukraine. The first actual intelligence report on the invasion in Ukraine was from a Ukrainian holding a phone, videotaping as the Russians crossed the border, okay? And so that publicly available information was immediately grabbed, because that's one of the things about OSINT, the speed of it, to be able to take it, verify it, against also, verifying that the airborne drop was not real. That's the reason that we need OSINT in the Army and for the tactical force, because the battles happen fast. Information is moving much faster, and there's so much information out there. We need properly trained and certified folks to be able to actually go out there and get it fast, get it to commanders so they can make decisions on the battlefield.
Tell me if I'm getting this right, but the data points are spread much more broadly. So say in the heyday of the Cold War, the data points would be a satellite in the sky, right? Not everybody can do that. Used to be the prerogative of a nation state. It would be a U-2 bomber flying over the Soviet Union. It would be these things that would largely be controlled by the government. But now the data point could be average Ukrainians with what by Cold War standards is a very powerful computer, i.e. your iPhone or your Android. So a lot of the action is now taking place in different places, so the intelligence has to follow where the action goes. Is that a fair way to describe it, do you think?
Yeah, I think so. So why the Army and why, look, our job as any other service is to protect the nation, right? And then to fight and win wars. And so if the intelligence and the data is moving to a particular place that is going to be beneficial to you to be able to do that, to fight and win wars, then you need to move where that is at, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so, the data points are different, right? The data points now are everybody that has a phone that's potential intelligence, where 50 years ago, clearly not the case. And so the way we have to view these things is different. And so, if you think about it from an Army perspective, right, there are, with any war or any scenario you could think of, like there are strategic, tactical and strategical implications to everything, right? If you look at, you take Ukraine or you take Israel, and you see that even though you're not directly involved in the fight, you see what's going on, right? There are strategic implications across the world, and there are organizations in the Army that are responsible for those parts of the world. So they've got to be able to have the best intelligence capability to answer those. So that's why OSINT for the Army. Like, we have people in very specific areas for threats that we believe are future threats. And so it's important to have them, having the best capability intelligence. So that's why.
So let's just say CENTCOM.
Yeah.
So could you flesh that example out for us?
Well, so I use USARPAC, right? So U.S. Army Pacific, and is responsible for, the Pacific in its entirety. In particular, right, there are a lot of concerns over China, right? What is the future of China? What would that look like? What is the threat? We all read the newspapers. We see what is going on and the concerns over Taiwan. And what would that mean? What are the strategic implications if China moves into Taiwan? Now, you look at it broadly and you say, well, there's not a war going on, right? However, there might be a war going on in the information space, in the data space, that you've got to be able to tap into to inform you and inform the decisions that you're making. So if I'm able to get open source intelligence and data on something that outwardly you would not understand that China is exploring, say in Taiwan, but we might be able to find some stuff open source wise that says, wait, why is China building something here that anybody on the outside wouldn't even know? That wouldn't be an article that they see. But as we're digging and we look and we say, why are they building here? What are the implications of them building here? What is it they're trying to do? And then you start to say, are they bringing people in? Are they bringing equipment in? Right. And then you just start to spiral and say, what is it? And so, that's the importance of it. And we have an Army unit that's responsible for all that. And so not having that unit use open source would be a potential detriment.
I think it might be useful briefly just to touch on the gray zone, hybrid war, information operations, that whole kind of space there, no matter what you want to call it. So we used to have this idea of peace and of war, and war meant when the bullets were flying, the artillery shells were flying, and in peace was when, we turned the swords into plowshares and there was a peace dividend and so forth. But it's a lot more complicated than that now. So could you just tell us a little bit more? This is something that is going on all the time now, and this is something that, the Army's not at war in the sense that they're firing bullets, but we're not kind of at peace completely either. So just help our listeners understand what's going on in the modern world.
Yeah, I'm really fascinated by that as well, that gray space thing. And Georgetown's Strategic Institute, they did a very good paper on the gray space maybe a year or so ago. Really, really great paper in explaining that gray space, right? And it's you're not fully at peace, but you're not fully at war. It's where, nation states can, through the information environment, which is really what they're taking advantage of now, walk right up to that line of right before firing bullets, right, and try to impact without having to fire anything.
And just to change tack a little bit, How has the Army adjusted to open source intelligence, to OSINT? So I know that you guys pride yourselves in being, at the forefront of embracing OSINT and so forth. But just tell us about some of the ways in which the Army has leaned into OSINT. So how is it embedded? Is it a separate, you have the artillery, the infantry, OSINT, or is it embedded into uh, regiments, divisions, corps? You would mention CENTCOM earlier. There's a whole bunch of things we can explore here, even training, recruitment, and culture. But let's just focus more on the institutional level. Like how does OSINT bite into the U.S. Army? Where is it grafted on? Where is it embedded? How is it structured?
Yeah. So the Army made the decision, as I mentioned, to build OSINT collectors for the force to do that. So that was a commitment to do that. Therefore, OSINT is now an intelligence discipline. So when you think of all the other intelligence disciplines that are out there, this is the newest one, okay, out there, or at least newest one to be formalized. So that's what we've done. We formalized it. The Army G2 has made that decision. And then based on that decision, we have created OSINT teams. We've placed them in the Army, across the Army force, within intelligence organizations out there. And then what we've done is we have now set up formalized training. We now have training in our schoolhouse, so our Intel schoolhouse. We're the first service to do that across DoD. To do that, we now, like I said, have that formal training. We have additional training. We've also, in our training, while we're specifically focusing on collectors, we also have training available for those that are non-collectors. So they know what they can and can't do, or where things are located, that they can get to some of that easier information to get to, and they're not actually doing the collection mission to have that. So, and then again, just from a program side, and that's our role, and myself as the director, to manage that intelligence program on behalf of the Army G2.
Yeah, I think that's the important thing here is when you talk about leaning in and leaning forward, what the Army did, and that's building out a true open source intelligence force structure, right? So building teams that are specific to open source only. They're not doing other jobs. They're not doing they are open source collectors, and building those teams out and putting them at all of the major organizations throughout the Army. And, we never talk specific numbers, right, for a lot of reasons. But, we've really had a very dedicated effort towards building those out and have been very, very successful. And so in all major organizations in the Army, we have a collection team that is specific to OSINT. That's how important it is to us.
So just for an example, many of our listeners will know of the 101st Airborne. Mm-hmm. So there would be an OSINT.
Yep.
They've got an OSINT capability.
Yep. All the majors would have an OSINT capability of some sort. And, that's very important. But it's but I think what we all really recognize is in that information space, in that publicly available information space, that you've got to have folks dedicated to that mission. And so, for us, thankfully, our senior most leaders in the Army are, on board with moving forward because they see the importance and they see where we're at in this space.
So what you're saying is the argument's over. Now it's just a case of onboarding and implementing and so forth.
Yeah, for us. And I think we, I think when we, met originally and stuff, and I made the comment, there are no cloudy days in OSINT, right? I stole that from one of our collectors in Europe, and I told him I'll give him credit for it the first 3 times I use it. Anything after that, it's mine. I own it, right? But I will give him credit for it. But I think that is pretty accurate, right? Like when you talk about traditional collection platforms, and let's just say aircraft, right? Aircraft can't fly in all weather conditions, right? If you're not in the fight in Ukraine, you're not, you might not be flying your aircraft, right? Like there is crew rest. There are a bunch of things that happen with just say aircraft, right? that in OSINT, open source, I don't have to worry about. I don't got to worry about clouds. I don't got to worry about overcast. I don't got to worry about, like, people are always on the internet. They're always posting things. There's always information out there and data out there. So we view it now as the INT of first resort. Like, if we can go to open source first, what can we glean from that and then use it to tip and cue other intelligence disciplines, right? Because we can look, I like to think of it as we can look everywhere where a satellite might be tasked to look somewhere, right? Specifically in a collection, but I can look everywhere. And if I see something, then I can tip and cue for a satellite or for a plane or for something else to look specifically at it. So yeah, I like to say I can look everywhere, and a lot of those other capabilities look somewhere.
So it's ubiquitous, omnipresent, and it's unconstrained by geographic or meteorological factors.
Yeah, unconstrained.
Okay.
And some folks would argue, well, what if the internet is taken down, right? Then you don't. And I would say the internet's not taken down everywhere, right? And there are capabilities that can quickly establish an internet within a country, right?
Mm.
But it's not down everywhere. There are countries surrounding it where the internet isn't down that you can glean information, right? So again, I understand the argument, but I can still get a lot of information.
And tell us a little bit more about some of the tools then. Let our listeners understand, how does one do this other than going on Chrome and putting in some search terms or using Boolean logic? Like, what are we using? What are the interfaces? What are the platforms?
Well, I mean, the short answer, because that's what I'll start with, is we're providing capabilities for collectors to get to places in the internet, like we said, deep and dark web, that just make getting that access a little easier. Clearly, I don't want to give away our trade craft of how we do that to do that. But we look across the spectrum for what we need access to, where we need to get to, and then we go and search for that capability out there in industry. And then we bring that back, test it, and then try it out. And then if it works, we go after that. And again, I just go back to, for me, we call them tools. I'm tool agnostic, okay? There is no one tool that will get you everything you need to have. And so those tools that we use, we change those and have to be very adaptable to bring in new tools, drop out old tools, again, as the environment changes and where and again, from a regional perspective, the Army is global. Certain regions, you need access to certain things or certain areas within the internet that, so tools specific to that area would be used for that. So there's we have what we call a standard set of tools that we give to everybody. That's kind of the baseline. But then depending on where you're operating or what your specific mission is, we'll give you tools that allow you to do that even better.
That's interesting. And I think it would be interesting to also speak about some of the lessons that have come out of the Ukraine war or what's been happening in Gaza.
I mean, I think for Ukraine, I think the big thing was just the speed at which OSINT can move. All the way from, the indications, like you said, trains moving toward the border, snow on, where are they coming from, all that. I mean, all of that can lead into intelligence, right? It's information, but ultimately you want to get that information to answer specific requirements and turn it into intelligence. So all the way to, again, as I mentioned, the example of coming across the border, really because there's so much technology out there and everybody having a phone, again, somebody's collecting information. For OSINT, we're going to take that information and turn it into intelligence. And so I think the speed, I think we've learned the ability to tip and cue other INTs, or even to help follow up with things that are going on. I would say battle damage assessment is something, right? somebody out there, they see a destroyed tank and they take a picture. Okay, well, let's look at it and find out what kind of tank was it? Where was it destroyed? Can we tell how it was destroyed? There's all kinds of things that OSINT can do for you. Again, it goes back to what's your mission and exactly what intelligence requirement you're looking or trying to answer to do that. That goes back to the capability side. You want the capability to get to the data or the data sets that are going to get you the information that you need to have. You don't need everything. That's one thing. Everybody's like, go scrape the internet, or take the internet. Just too big, too much going on, right? So you try to narrow, getting to the data that you need.
I think the biggest thing that OSINT taught us, or that Ukraine taught us about OSINT, was that maybe we had forgotten about it, didn't pay attention to the importance of it. And we quickly realized the amount of intelligence and the amount of information that open source could provide, especially when you are not directly in the fight, but you're trying to find out and figure out exactly what's going on. And I think people quickly realized that, wow, there is a lot of information out there and a lot of valuable information that we need to be taking advantage of, right? Because OSINT was always there. We've been doing it for 50 years, like I said, periodicals and those kinds of things. And but I don't think it started to come to the forefront with the election, 2016. Folks started to see that. And then I think it really, really hit home for folks with Ukraine, at least from an Army perspective. At least, speaking for us from an OSINT perspective, and the phone calls we got and things like it really took hold. Like, wow, okay, yeah, maybe we've been missing something here. And so then when Israel and Hamas started, it was like, we didn't miss a beat. People didn't miss a beat. They knew exactly, okay, we're going to OSINT. We know what OSINT can provide. But that had to be a lesson learned for us out of Ukraine. And it was a big lesson learned for us.
It's quite an interesting inflection point to me, because it seems like you've got civilians who are now in the information chain or the intelligence chain and also in the kill chain there, inserting themselves into it, sometimes helpfully, obviously sometimes unhelpfully, but it's a new kind of dynamic, which is quite interesting.
Yeah, it is. I mean, but I would go a step further and say, not just that civilians are in that cycle, because they are, right? Like if they're taking a video and they're posting it, they become in the cycle. But I would say, the amount of things that people do on the internet that leaves their data or their information out there, their data becomes big part of the intelligence cycle, and they probably don't even know that they're doing it, right? Like, I traveled here, I shopped there, I did, whatever, and that information is all there, and all that information can be gathered, and it can be used. And to Shawn's point, right? Like, it's very important that we stress that our stuff is foreign data. There's no U.S. persons. We don't collect on U.S. persons. That's very, very important.
Can we just touch on that briefly?
Yeah.
Posse comitatus, is it? Or comitatus?
Yeah. I mean, we have laws in place that intelligence professionals, right, cannot, we cannot collect on U.S. persons unless you're in a career field that has specific authorities from a law enforcement perspective or others that allows you to do that. But from, merely speaking from an OSINT perspective, we do not have those authorities, and we cannot, and we don't. And so when we talk about the data as tools or services that we access, we are very, very clear to folks that we do business with that the data must be foreign data, and it must be cleaned to ensure there are no U.S. persons, because we can't. And we have a very, very robust oversight and auditing capability in place, as well as kind of like a second and third guardrail to make sure that folks are not doing that. That's how seriously we take it. Because some folks will always get to that, like privacy. And I understand that. And that's been a big discussion on the Hill. Privacy. I'm with you. I get it. But we don't.
Yeah, and it's the first thing that we train. When we train our collectors, the very first week is all focused on the rules, the regulations, the laws, the authorities, the missions, all of that has to take place before you can actually do collection. We cover that, and then as Dennis mentioned, from an oversight and compliance perspective, we monitor the activity of all Army OSINT collectors on what they're doing to make sure that they're not doing something that, again, violates any law, rules, regulations, or anything.
And when you mentioned Americans there, Dennis, is this permanent residents as well, or is it citizens only?
It's all the same. It's nothing that touches, for us, nothing that touches U.S. soil.
Okay.
In essence, like everything has got to be overseas. So we're not permanent residents, you name it. If you're here, any data that is U.S. based in a sense, like whether it's the businesses, whether it's people, whether it's whatever, we don't touch it at all. Completely foreign, every bit of it.
Okay. And I think just as we get towards the end of the interview, I think it would be good to talk about how this is cascading out. So the Navy, the Air Force, the rest of the IC, DIA, even allies, are they all following suit? Like what's going on with the OSINT ecosystem?
So let me hit big picture.
Yeah.
Then let you dig down into the other. So big picture IC wise, yeah. Released a couple weeks ago was CIA's, or the Open Source Enterprises, open source strategy. Their public facing, where they are going with open source intelligence. It's out there. It's been out there. It was on LinkedIn and very clearly shows their strategy for where they want to go in the future. So yeah, they're following suit. DIA the same way. And most of the IC in general, same way. Even at the Director of National Intelligence level, they're building out a team and have built out a team specifically centered on open source intelligence and what does policy and resourcing and those things need to look like. So everybody is following suit and coming along, and it's very synchronized. As far as the foreign partners goes, it's the same thing. Our allies and partners are very concerned about the open source space, and we collaborate with them a lot and synchronize efforts every place that we can, knowing we each know that every country has different roles on what they can and can't collect in the sense of publicly available information. So keeping that in mind, there are certain things we can do together, certain things we can't do together. But to that end too, there are some great efforts going on in U.S. Army Europe with allies and partners centered on open source intelligence. So everybody is following suit. Everybody understands, and I think just the fact that the open source enterprise published a public-facing strategy is something that you just would not have seen even 3 years ago, 4 years ago. You just wouldn't see it. And so I think that really is a telltale sign of where we are going and how important it is to everybody.
Okay.
Yeah, and I would just add, for me, most of my engagement, I spend some across the intelligence community, but with the other services, a lot of work that we do collectively together, whether it's training, equipping, those things that we do. And so pretty much everybody's moved out on it. I think all the programs are different because all the services are different, right? We all have different roles and responsibilities out there. But yeah, we collaborate quite a bit on pretty much everything that we do out there, so we can share lessons learned, what's working for you, what's not, what are you looking for versus what we're looking for. Again, back on the training as well. We do a lot of that together. And again, I would just echo same thing with the with our allies and partners. We do a lot of training with them as well.
And just so our listeners can understand this episode in a little bit deeper context, could you just tell them a little bit more about each of your own careers, like what brought you to this point? Are you Army military intelligence professionals? Are you OSINTers who the Army's drafted in? Just give us a flavor of your background so listeners can understand.
Go first.
Yeah, sure. So I'm 33 years. Now 30's almost 37, but 33 in the Army. Intelligent professional the entire time, an all-source background. Spent about 15 of those years in kind of a senior advisory role in this profession. It, organizational levels from, 70 people to when I retired, overseeing stuff with the G2 and the Pentagon, 60,000 intelligence stuff that could affect, some 60,000 people roughly, right? So, serving at all levels, but 33 years. And then, I retired and then I pulled back into this for the last 3.5 years. So, I'm going on 37 years in this intelligence business. I was working this portfolio before I retired. My boss said, "Hey, I need you to start working this and fixing it." And then I retired. And then they kind of offered me the opportunity to come back to this, and I couldn't pass it up because when I left, I had far too much in my mind work that was unfinished. I was very passionate about open source intelligence needing to be a discipline and where it needed to go in the future and the importance of it that I thought that we just didn't get as an Army. And so I kind of put a mark on the wall and said, I'll come back and I'll give myself, 5 years to help turn this around and move it forward. And I think we've done a lot. But that's what brought me back to this. I felt like this was and is an intelligence discipline, and we needed to move it forward that way.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so for me, I spent 37 years in the Army in uniform. 30 of that was doing intelligence. For me, really, I got exposed. So I was an all-source intelligence analyst, and so I got to work with all the INTs. But it was probably about 15 years ago that I really got the opportunity to work OSINT, and I was really fascinated by it. I was probably shocked at how much information or intelligence you could gather from publicly available information. And to me, that's just continued to grow. And that was kind of my thought at the time. This isn't going to stop. This is only going to get bigger, and there's going to be more information out there to do that. So like Dennis, I became very passionate about it. It was, after I retired, interested in the same thing that Dennis said. Hey, we haven't moved forward as fast as I think we should. And I try to hold myself that if you ever complain about something, you should volunteer to fix it. And they hired me to do that. And so that's been really, I think for both of us, we're both passionate about it. We both see the benefits of it. And that's really what's been our driving force to get after it. And great support from our leadership that understands it as well to go get this done. And that's what we've been doing.
Wow. And just to finish off, listeners out there, they're interested in OSINT, they want to learn more. Are there sources they should go to, books they should look at, websites they can check out, etc.?
What I would say to folks that are interested in open source is all of the agencies within the IC do career fairs. And I would encourage folks to go to those career fairs and have conversations with those individuals about it, because you're not gonna see a lot of that advertised, and not everybody does OSINT careers like we do. And so if you want to really learn about them and what it does, and it's important, I think, to talk to those folks and get a sense of what each of those agencies does in that field to say, where do I think I might fit in? I would look at Georgetown's CSIS for some of the work, some of the research that they have done in the field of OSINT to really expose, because they've done some really incredible work and wrote some incredible articles and research on it. So yeah, I would definitely check out anything that they have done. And there are a few others around, but yeah, CSIS has done some incredible work, and you can find out a lot of information from that.
I think the one that I typically bring up if people really want to see some really good OSINT done, and that is, really it's on 60 Minutes. You can see it on 60 Minutes, but Bellingcat. Okay, and the shoot down that when the Russians shot down the Dutch airliner. Mm-hmm. If you really watch what they did, that's some incredible work done. That's what it can do for you. Mm-hmm.
Wow. Yeah, there's also another, and I won't curse on here, but there was a show that was on Netflix. It was Don't F with Cats, right? Not a military OSINT perspective, but a civilian perspective, just to show, how you can harness the power of open source, of what that very, very small group of people did to track down somebody that they ended up suspecting of murdering somebody and posting it online, right? But they spent years, really using open source to gather information. And so to see the power of it from some passionate civilians and what can be done, and think about that, that's the same thing that we do on the military side, and that same kind of passion. But yeah, Bellingcat was a very good one that was out. I think they've actually, Netflix is on.
They've got several
out there too. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And just to clarify before we close out, OSINT's not just for tech people. It's not just for coders and so forth.
No.
No, in fact, I don't know if any of our collectors are coders or IT or tech folks. They're of all different intelligence career fields and backgrounds. And yeah, it is. Yeah, you don't need to know anything about coding or tech to really do OSINT.
I think if you know how to maneuver the internet, I mean, that's probably the best skill, or one of the best skills you can bring in. We'll teach you everything else.
Okay. Well, it's a pleasure to speak to you both. Thanks so much. It's been a fascinating conversation.
Thanks to you. Appreciate it. Appreciate you having us.
Thanks for having us.
Thanks for listening to this episode of SpyCast. Please follow us on Apple, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. If you enjoy the show, please tell your friends and loved ones. Please also consider leaving us a 5-star review. If you have feedback, you can reach us by email at spycast@spymuseum.org or on Twitter @INTL_SpyCast. If you go to our page at thecyberwire.com/podcast/SpyCast, you can find links to further resources, detailed show notes, and full transcripts. I'm your host, Andrew Hammond, and my podcast content partner is Erin Dietrich. The rest of the team involved in the show is Mike Mincy, Memphis Von III, Emily Coletta, Emily Renz, Afua Anokwa, Ariel Samuel, Elliot Peltzman, Trey Hester, and Jen Iben. This show is brought to you from the home of the world's preeminent collection of intelligence and espionage-related artifacts, the International Spy Museum.